We're live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this work study session for Independent School District 624. I welcome everyone. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Arcan,
Here.
Lloyd,
Here.
Chapman,
He's on mute, and I know that he's there.
Okay, I'll come back. Ellison here, Mullen,
Here?
Newmaster. You're muted, Marge.
Okay, here.
Thompson. Okay. Absent.
You want to call Chapman again?
Chapman.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that Ms. Thompson will be a little bit late, but she should be clicking in. With that, we have one discussion item for today, which is the fall 2020 school reopening plan overview. Dr. Kazmierczak.
All right, thank you, Chair Mullen, members of the board, and thank you for acknowledging Ms. Thompson is on her way. She's traveling back for the meeting, so she'll be hopping in, and we'll acknowledge when she arrives. But she let me know this morning that she would be joining us. So, all right, so yeah, one agenda item, but probably about as big of an agenda item as you will ever see. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to connect about the coming school year. So I first want to thank you, school board members, for your flexibility in creating this opportunity today. It's an important time for us. It's an important time, obviously, in the state of Minnesota, and certainly for White Bear Lake area schools, it's no different. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. We'll give you an update as to where we are right now. We've been developing options that we think will be desirable for our families as we move ahead into this school year. And we've had an eye on making sure that the plan and the program that we're offering is strong so that our students don't fall behind. And then obviously we've been keeping safety and at the forefront, and that I'll show you some survey data, and that is certainly at the forefront of everybody, parents, students, staff. And there's also the reality that we're entering a pretty difficult period of time here, not only with this coming school year in terms of dealing with the pandemic, but then the aftermath of what schools will likely be experiencing throughout the country, and again, in particular in Minnesota, just because of the way the economic forecast is. And so we're in for a difficult time, and so the ability to sit here and talk through our plan and to think about long term, we want to make sure we're providing the kind of service that our community wants, both now and in the future as we think ahead. So I'm going to jump in. There's going to be a little bit of a tag team approach to our presentation. So if you haven't been by District Center yet, I don't know if we figured out who did this, but the bear has a mask on. We showed up one day for work, and it pretty closely aligned with when the governor's mandate came down, that somebody made sure our bear had a mask. So that's that image. It's not staged. Somebody did that, and we thought that was pretty appropriate to start our presentation here today. Go ahead, Steve. So we're going to talk today about 3 different options, and we'll probably spend the bulk of our time around hybrid and distance learning, because those are intertwined pretty closely. And we've had a lot of people working, and there have been dozens of people who have been involved. The committee structure is listed there. I won't necessarily go through it all, but it's been an interesting few weeks, few months, certainly. And then as we think about the coming year and what might be, we've been doing a lot of planning, and now with the governor's direction yesterday, we have a little bit more clarity, not entirely, but you know, we at least have some direction. So we're going to talk about that today. So go ahead, Steve. All right, so we just wanted to share briefly some of the results that we had a couple different survey instruments. One was just a very simple survey that went out in June after the school year ended, and we asked just a few questions just to get a temperature of how parents or how families were feeling. So at the time we were contemplating transportation and what that would look like, and we asked the question, and 59, just under 60% of families indicated they would have their child use district transportation in the fall if we were in person. So we were, again, just trying to gauge what that might look like in terms of our capacity. We asked about what preferred learning model and what their preferred learning model would be, and in-person was preferred by 64.7% of the respondents, and that's the top pie on this slide. And then we asked about what preferred learning model when in-person learning was not available, and 76.5% of respondents said that a hybrid model would be preferred. And so what's telling on this is that at the time, you know, nearly a quarter of our families had indicated that they would prefer to remain in a distance learning model. We're going to ask a question again here in the coming days. We'll be obviously a lot has happened over the last couple months just in the world, and so we're going to ask this question again as we ramp up for the fall. We'll need to get not only ask the question, but we're going to need to get some level of commitment from families so that we can plan accordingly and plan our staffing around that. So that will be something we'll be working on in the coming week. Okay, go ahead, Steve. Then we also launched a new survey method that we're pretty excited about, and it's called Thought Exchange. We had a lot of involvement in that, and that was just earlier this month. A lot of participation, a lot of thoughts shared, and a lot of ratings. So we feel good about the engagement and common themes that emerged. One, it was pretty evenly split as to who would wish for students to be back in person and who would wish to maintain the distance learning model. And those opinions were very strong on one way or the other. And I think in the last few weeks, months, I think we've learned that that's sort of how it is right now in the world. There are very strong opinions on either side of any issue, and it makes it challenging to navigate. But you know, quite honestly, at least you know where people stand. So safety was definitely a strong theme that emerged amongst all participants. And again, regardless of the feelings of in-person or distance learning, it was a very strong theme. And so that's important to note. Participants voiced a very strong opinion that if we were to use distance learning this coming fall, that it needed to look different and be different from what it looked like in the spring. And that is something we heard. You know, I've fielded phone calls and emails, and many of us have for several weeks now during the spring, through the summer, and then now. That was a common theme. For some folks, they thought it worked pretty well, but I would say the scale probably tilts to the side where people were frustrated. And I don't. I think we're acknowledging that, and we've been trying to come up with a more robust way of doing our distance learning. So, and I also want to say that that was not a knock on our teachers in any way, and nor has the communication about that been that either. There's been a lot of credit given to educators who've made great effort to make this work in a very trying time. Just that now that we had some time and have some time before the school year begins, I think we can do better than what we did in the spring, and I think our educators would probably agree with that statement. And we're excited to be able to do that. And then participants asked for more for continued communication from the district. That was one of the things that folks shared that they appreciated. And then this, it's a little bit hard to read, but the top thoughts from students, top thoughts from staff, and you can see those. And again, I've touched on many of them. A lot of it had to do with safety, and students talked about grades, and we'll touch on grades in a little while. We want to make sure we do that because there's a lot of questions around that. So anyway, it's a good tool, and so school board members and anyone who's listening, that you might see more of that method of surveying to gauge relative strength of ideas and concepts and themes emerge, and that's very helpful in planning. So, okay, Steve. All right, so let's see, is this slide 7? Are we ready to shift gears over to Allison? Okay, Dr. Allison Gillespie, again, for everybody in the meeting here knows her, but I want to introduce her for those who might be watching. Dr. Allison Gillespie is our new Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. She's been in that particular capacity now for exactly 31 days. So welcome, Dr. Gillespie.
Thank you. It's been quite the 31 days. It's good to see everyone. It's really I say this often, but I truly mean that. It's an honor to stand up and represent really amazing leadership teachers. We've partnered. I can't tell you the amount of people who've been working really, really, really hard. I officially started July 1st, but it's really been since the last day of school, and really looking at how we knew and we received guidance on the how of the 3 models that they were asking us to look at, but we had to think about the what. How are we going to, we're going to have 3 different models, but what are we going to deliver to students? How are we going to ensure that the plan that we developed in the spring, while we have a lot that we're proud of, we all acknowledge there were things that we could enhance. There were areas perhaps we missed, and now hindsight is better. And so in that plan, where it was in a crisis mode, how do we transition and make another giant leap towards who we want to become as a system, and transition from a crisis plan to a plan that we have to sustain for a school year? And that's a long time in our students' educational lives, and we needed to make a plan that took us, while I don't know any more difficult time in my life, and I know many of the people that I talk with, and I think all of our lives, it's also the greatest opportunity we have to change our system in a way that we've been trying to change our system for years. And so I keep asking our leaders and teacher leaders and union partnership working with, how can we take a giant leap towards who we're hoping to become in the future, knowing that we also have to be responsive, that people are all in different spots, and maybe where they could be if we weren't in a pandemic, they're not there yet, but we have to make a giant leap forward. And so we pulled together an instructional leadership steering committee at the end of June, and really it had representatives from our educator union, our para-educator union, our principals, K-12, early childhood community educators, district leadership, and we really took quite a few meetings, and they met for quite a few hours to talk about what is it that we want to create for our students, knowing that distance learning was going to be a part of it. There was no question in our mind that we would have families that would not feel comfortable sending their students to school, and or because of medical issues or illnesses in their household that they were having, whether in the students or in family members, they wouldn't be able to come to school. And I did not want, and nor did any of them, to have distance learning to be seen as less than in terms of a model for our students. It would just create greater gaps in our system, and we're working diligently to close any gaps. And so what that committee landed on is what we are doing is called flexible learning. And so it is a shift in thinking, and it's hard because we continually get feedback, which is very helpful from our educators and our educator union and our administrators as they're working. Our educators are nervous. How do I have, if we do move to a hybrid model, meaning kids are in school some days and they're not, how do I balance 2 different types of platforms? Or how do I do that in a way that makes sure I'm moving my students forward?
Well,
and so
Dr. Gillespie, I'm going to just acknowledge that Angela Thompson is now on. She was able to get in, so I just wanted to make note of that. So,
yep. Thank you. So what we have is called flexible learning, and I'll talk more about the how in a little while and what that looks like for each model. But essentially what that means is we are creating, I call them frameworks, but I would say the greatest way would be guiding documents or guiding parameters for our educators as they think about, how do I create lessons and how do I create my content for this school year so that I'm as seamlessly as possible able to transition my learning between the 3 different models, knowing that I'm also going to have students that are at distance learning at home. And so we have 3 different committees right now working on that: an elementary committee, a middle school, and a high school. and in partnership with our building leaders and paraeducators and teachers to develop what those frameworks look like, so that when a teacher and their collaborative team start working together, they can really look at how would I set up a lesson so that I understand when students are with me, this is how I'm providing some direct instruction, but what would happen and how do students access that instruction if they're at home, and how do I set that up? We've really done a ton of research this summer around some exciting models that I know our secondary teachers and leaders are investigating, and so how do we set our teachers up with the most success possible with as many resources, and then provide them time to really dive deeply and set their lessons up. And so those committees have been working diligently since June through July and are finishing. And then our intention is within the next week to set teams up and allow teachers, it's not required obviously, but optional time if they want to start working, so that they can begin looking at that lesson structure. And that is K-12. So that will continue us through the whole year. So as students are thinking about, as we're thinking about all these different transitions between models, that the what and the lesson structure will stay consistent. And it is a shift in thinking, but it's one that we really feel like will take off bits and pieces together and provide a lot of collaborative time for people to partner together, but it will transition the way that we see the learning experience for students past this year. This isn't something that is simply just for this year to get us through this year. This will really help us as we're shifting and really operationalizing a lot of our strategic plan. You can go to the next slide. Additionally, we did a lot of work, and I think one of the greatest things that happened for us in the spring is that it allowed us to really focus heavily on equity and access and focus resources and really rapidly respond to needs in our system. And so we have, I think, a very innovative way of families being able to request interpreters. A collaborative team came together, and so there is access on our website. And if you click on it, there is a list in writing of every single language in our district and how to actually email. I need to call me with an interpreter in English, but it's translated into their language in written language, but also there's a button next to it where it's in spoken. And so we worked really hard on that, and that's a pretty innovative way to provide access. And so the team that thought of that, and kudos to Marissa Vetti and her department partnering with them, just really constantly thinking of innovative ways to make sure everything we have in our system is accessible for all of our students and families. Our cultural liaisons are a dynamic team that continue to partner with all of us and push us to become better, but also truly really connecting with our families and students and letting us know where are barriers that perhaps we don't even know exist and how we can get better. Our special education, special student support services, Section 504, everyone's really partnering together. We learned a lot in the spring, and how do we continue to make sure that we provide as much collaboration time so that families are seeing those wraparound services so that their students are successful. And then all the work that Steve Asper and his department did to make sure each one of our students has access to a Chromebook. All of our secondary students have Chromebooks, and then any of our elementary families who would need Chromebook access, again, would be able to get one from us. And then we have Wi-Fi hotspots for families, and then a tech helpline should anyone need support.
All right, thank you, Allison. And we're going to walk through the little bit of what the governor shared yesterday, and the Department of Education, the Department of Health provided guidance for us. I won't walk through each step, but I included it here, and I know probably all of us have read through how this is going to work, but I thought I would give a brief overview of what it looks like, so that you have the context necessary as we start talking about White Bear Lake. Yeah, again, I won't walk through the steps necessarily, but let's move on. So really the key metric is this total number of cases for the last 14 days divided by the county population divided by 10,000, and that gives us our 14-day county case level rate per 10,000. And that data is provided to us. Go ahead. And so you take that figure that is calculated, and then you plug it into this this table to see where you land. And so for us, you can see at the bottom of this slide, the district is comprised of, we're comprised of 3 different counties. The largest is Ramsey, and then Washington, and then Anoka. But if we look at the Ramsey County with the highest figure at 16.51, so you would then apply that 16.51 onto this table, and that fits into that the second line, the 10 to 19, which would mean in person for elementary students and then hybrid for secondary students. And we'll talk more about what that means and what that might mean for us. I can tell you that those figures, the Ramsey, Washington, and Anoka County, and really statewide, those figures have been growing considerably over the last few weeks. So I think this is, I don't know this, but one would suspect this is partly why Governor Walz mandated the masks, is because the data were growing generally statewide, and so this was an attempt to maybe change the trajectory of the data. So this is where we're at as of the latest data, and so we'll talk a little bit about the implications of this data going forward here in a little bit. Okay. All right. I think we're back to Allison. All right.
So I will talk us through what our hybrid model looks like, and then what our distance learning model looks like. And I'll start with early childhood and elementary. So for hybrid, our elementary and early childhood students would be on site at least 3 days per week. And each student would be, so our K-12, our week would be Monday through Thursday in terms of when we're talking about a combination of on-site and or you'll hear me talk about connecting digitally in terms of synchronous learning is the word that we use, but it's really connecting with a teacher live through your computer. And so in a 4-day week, Monday through Thursday, elementary students would be on site 3 days. And what that would mean is 1 day per those 4 days, a student would be at home and would be able to access their classroom through mini lessons that a teacher would be delivering, and there would be students at home, and that schedule will be consistent, because if you remember, our learning platform is that would be the learning platform. So those mini lessons will be delivered every single day, Monday through Thursday. Students who are distance learning would always view those lessons when they're at home, meaning students who choose 100% distance learning, and then students who are in hybrid, the day that they're at home, they would view those lessons. The learning board, if you had elementary students or remember us referencing that, is really the way that we describe to families what the learning goals are for that week. And it really will give them additional independent learning opportunities, reinforcement, enrichment opportunities. And then on Fridays, what that will do is there won't be that synchronous learning time, but it would allow families to continue with the learning goals that they would have learned about through the synchronous learning or face-to-face learning throughout Monday through Thursday, and our teachers to schedule small group check-ins with students they may be worried about, students, whether that's reinforcing skills, enriching skills, whatever that might be, along with doing some family engagement, teacher collaboration again, to make sure that the lessons we're providing are and supporting that learning model, or that across the board, that we're really providing highly engaging lessons for all of our students, and giving teachers time to do that, because our educators absolutely want to do that and absolutely want to attend professional development to continue to grow, but providing time is essential to making sure that happens. So what did I miss? That it would essentially be the hybrid model. So often what comes up is so we would work with families and work within our system, but and when I say work with families, we would schedule that day that we would have essentially 25% of the class. It would depend on the percentage based on how many families would choose to be distance learning, but it would be a scheduled day for that time, but we would schedule it trying to balance making sure essential childcare that we provide, school age care for our tier 1 essential workers that we would provide for those workers. And so really the schedule would be determined by the principal working with the families, but it would be a determined day by the district of Monday through Thursday, providing school age childcare for families that needed it, for the tier 1 essential workers. And then Fridays would be at home for all.
Chair Mullen, can I ask a question? This is Jessica.
Sorry, Jessica, I'm on mute. Yes, please go ahead.
Dr. Gillespie, when the schools and principals are working with families, will siblings be taken into consideration? So if you have multiple siblings at the same school, will they all be at home on the same day?
Yeah, our goal is really to try to coordinate that K-12 as once I get to secondary, even making sure the day the secondary student is home as much as we can is the day that they're home the same day as the elementary and younger students to provide as much support as we can. It will be obviously complicated, but we'll have all of us collaborating together and working through it, but absolutely.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mhm.
Dr. Gillespie, can we just pause 1 second to make sure if there's any other questions we
Yeah.
can catch up?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Is there any other questions from board members? Okay.
I think
Thank
Deb.
you very Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
I thought I saw Deb's hand. I don't know if did I miss it?
From
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead.
I don't think that because I don't see that side of things, so I apologize. Okay. Please continue. Thank you.
Yep. So then secondary would be 612 would be half of the students would attend in person on a Monday and Wednesday, and then the other half would be on a Tuesday and Thursday. And they would be receiving direct instruction from their teachers. And when they aren't in school, then they would be working individually or virtually in small groups on learning that was assigned by their teachers. So essentially, like I said, they're looking at frameworks so that direct instruction and enhancement is received from their teachers. And then what they're working on is, I don't know, more what you would think of as college, or for some of you who are educators, that flipped classroom where you're getting time to navigate learning that's either an enhancement of what you've learned in class and or setting you up for something that they're going to dive deeper with you in class the next time that they see you. Then again, Fridays are the same thing. There wouldn't be new learning, but it would allow them to, continue and refine anything that they weren't able to do for any of their classes during the week. And then also allow teachers time to schedule small group check-ins, either for reinforcement for students that they're nervous about or needing extra help, and or furthering learning for those who need further enrichment. And then also that collaborative time, family engagement, professional development, that type of stuff.
I have a question, Chair Mullen. This is Deb.
Dr. Gillespie, can we pause for a question?
Of course, yeah.
Go ahead.
I finally got myself off mute. I was just wondering, so at the elementary level, there's a lot of different pullouts. How does it work at the elementary level for the different pullouts? Because I know with the differentiated learning, you've got pullouts for literature, you have pullouts for mathematics, and even doing language, Spanish and orchestra and all those kinds of things. How would that work with the schedule?
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that. That is what I thought I was missing. So what consistently will happen is every single day there will be instruction in literacy, reading and writing, math, and social emotional learning, which is for some morning meeting, others have different structure for that. At least twice a week, students would receive science and or social studies, and then the principals will develop those schedules in collaboration with those specialists. So as school starts and once we know our model, they'll partner with them to make sure, because as we do research, there's lots of different models in terms of some of that occurs distance learning, some of it is push in and partner with classroom teachers. There's really a lot of different ways to do it, and the principals felt most comfortable in partnering with the specialists on that. But really,
so then technically we wouldn't be doing pullouts because you can't keep track of a group if you've got pullouts here, there, and everywhere. If we're going to be tracking these kids and who they're interacting with. Yeah,
it would be as much as they would be. The services will be pushing as much as possible and really prioritizing when we're in school. How do we prioritize those services that personalize the learning for the student, whether that's intervention, whether that's extension, and then we value obviously the specialist portion of the learning as well, and really wanting to partner with our specialists and what way do they feel like they could offer the best experience for students. In particular, music is one where there's lots of different recommendations and partnering with, that's just one example. There's lots of different things out there. So they, that seemed like I think a good compromise as we were trying to figure out many different aspects of that hybrid schedule.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Looks like Marge has a question.
Yes, I do have a question. If I can ask this, and this is just one of those basics. With all of the moving parts, which looks excellently thought out for instruction, the other part that gets more complex when we have different kids, different days, is how on earth do you keep up with the requirements for surfaces they touch, materials, keeping the book they use separate, or the pencils and other things, just the sort of things that can transfer.
Yeah.
So I've looked at lots of models, and I've talked to my niece that works in St. Paul, and that was one of the things. How do they have time? Are the teachers going to be expected to deep clean into between every group, or how are we going to do the nitty gritty piece of that? The instructional sounds well thought out for what we have to do. But what about the support piece?
There are also many wonderful people thinking about those aspects as well and trying to make sure that they're as seamless as possible, but they're also equally as important to us. So everything from extending passing time, staggering, zoning schools, to, you know, what does it look like in terms of cleaning between classes, common areas. I know Dan Rozier and Tim Walden, their team is going to present a little bit later in the presentation. And so they're way better versed than I am in terms of answering the specifics, but they've partnered very closely with our building principals, and that has for sure been a whole other aspect in terms of making sure that safety is, we followed all of MDH's guidelines and recommendations, and as we're scheduling, and continue to check in with our colleagues and make sure, because it is I don't know that I've ever worked on a more complex problem of practice is what I will call it.
Well, I will say thank you to that, and I agree. When we think of how difficult former schedules were, this is, beyond comprehension. But the other nitty-gritty thing is elementary kids are pretty bouncy. They have always done an interesting mix of lunch and recess. I'm sure someone's thought that all out, but that's just a question. And I know my neighbor said, are they going to eat in their classroom, or do they get to go out?
Yes to both of those. Bridget is here, so she'll talk more specifics about that, but they will be eating in their classrooms, and yes, they will still get to go outside and be in recess. It'll just look different than it's looked before, but they'll still get to get some of that energy out.
I have a question, Chair Mullen. I'll just go ahead. He's probably on mute. This is actually for Wayne. Since we're spread over 3 different counties, do we have to take in consideration that all 3 of those counties have to be below the threshold, or how will that work for us, since most of our schools are in Ramsey and just 2 at this point are in Washington? How do we work that?
Yeah, I think there's some interpretation there. I think what we would do at this point is that we would use the most, we would use the highest number we'd use the one that is the most restrictive for us in terms of the model. And that's what was talked about yesterday in a couple of different meetings. But there has been some conversation about, if you're in a county with a high figure, but your particular city where your school district might be encompassed by a certain part of the county that is actually faring quite well. There's some discussion about, if it's reliable data to work with the Department of Health in order to use that data too. But we wouldn't necessarily go down that path, but we do have the 3 counties, and right now they're pretty similar, but yeah, they could certainly change. I think with the advantage we have in that we're not like a small rural county is, a small outbreak or a small outbreak in a rural county your numbers would hike up pretty quickly. a little bit of an uptick in a larger county, we might not see these numbers fluctuate too greatly. But as I said earlier, they are on their way up. They're going the wrong direction in terms of what we would be able to choose and what we're hoping for as a state. But right, we would. That's a long answer. The short answer is we would use the most restrictive number.
So then, as a follow-up to that, are these numbers going to be given to us always in a 2-week lag?
Yep, they're
So the numbers that we're looking at now are 2 weeks ago, so we're always going to be looking at a 2-week lag.
correct. Yep.
And then, are we going to be getting numbers by concentrated area within the county, or are they just going to give us the county numbers?
Just the county numbers that I'm aware of. Yeah, I'm not aware of a more concentrated figure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Mullen, I think Dr. Arcand had a question.
I do. If I
My
may.
kind of moving around, so I apologize for that. Dr. Arcand.
I just had a real quick question. What kind of learning management system are we using for online? Are you using Google Classroom?
Mhm.
If you are, have you developed a template so that when I go into my math class, things are on the same categories, the same spots as when I go into an English or science class? I always know, because sometimes students get confused. They go to one class, where do I find it? They go to another class where they can find it. I was wondering if we've developed a template so they always know where to go when they're online.
We did receive feedback, even in the spring, that was confusing for students. So I know our principals worked with our teacher leaders and developed some consistency around it, and that's on their radar again too. So I don't know enough. I feel old saying that, but I haven't used it as a teacher. But if it's official template or not, but they're working on it for sure. And I want to note that our ALC and Transition Education Center colleagues would follow the same model for hybrid as we have there.
I have one more question.
Yeah, no.
Dr.
Um,
Dumas.
I'm thinking of the humongous amount of work this has been to create this so far, to begin the tip of the iceberg for the beginning of the school year. But I know, having been a classroom teacher, that all year long, this kind of effort will have to be done. So is there time, even a reasonable amount of time, worked in there for individual classroom teachers and or their cohort to work together to keep ahead of the tsunami? Thank you.
Yeah, across the board, our teachers all will have common prep at the end of the day in all the buildings, so that we hope will help. And then they all will have Fridays, and we haven't developed a schedule. And in my mind, my role as district is to provide as many resources and remove barriers, and then give our buildings as much time as they can with their teacher leaders to plan that time. So I know that they'll prioritize making sure the teachers have the time and professional development that they need to meet all the demands and meet with our students, because they worked really hard to make sure students were successful in the spring in some really, really difficult times. So, what we do at the district level, we'll be there to support, but it is tons and tons more work. It'll be like that the whole year, but a lot of this district level stuff is, the parameters will be set eventually, and then it's making sure we provide enough resources, and time is a huge resource. So those Fridays will be humongous. They'll be really important for us. Thanks for asking that question.
Dr. Gillespie, this is Don Mullen. I have a question in regards to, and if there's please tell me if there's, if you're going to address this down in the presentation a little bit, or someone else is, I would appreciate you just telling me. I just have some concerns I've been taking some notes over, for example, cleaning supplies. I understand there's been a shortage there, and I want to make sure, one of my concerns is that we need to definitely be thinking about a model that keeps our students safe, but that also keeps, our staff safe, and making sure that they're safe inside of the buildings. I mean, they're, being able to make sure everything is sanitized and everything else. I haven't heard that yet inside of these models. Is that kind of coming down the road?
Yep. Tim Wald and his team, there's a whole section on all of that stuff that's coming.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I know that Ms. Beloit had a question also.
Yeah, sorry, last question. I know students have to be in for a certain number of days. That's why we have to build in our snow days and all that kind of thing. How is that going to apply to this? Because I'm assuming we're probably going to have to shrink the day if you set up schedules so that teachers at the end of the day have time to prep for the next day. How does all of that work into that? Are we getting some leeway from the state on that? And are we, how are we going to compress that?
So it's a balance of what's synchronous in terms of when our students face-to-face and what's asynchronous. So and that's where that learning board, what work they have. So it does that time that they're not at school, there's still, they consider that asynchronous time, and how we put that into our model in terms of students and the learning activities that they have. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Gillespie, Don Mullen again, just kind of maybe a little follow-up. And earlier on during this distant learning process, we had a lot of conversation around the grading system and how that thing's going to work. Has there been any thought around how we're going to move this moving forward for the grading system?
Yeah, we've received a lot of feedback, and actually I'm going to pull together 2 committees starting next week, an elementary and a secondary committee that also has teacher representation and staff, and we'll put together a recommendation and bring it to the board for August 24th with every intention of having a grading system at the secondary level that's still based in obviously equity in what we do, but it also includes grades in terms of letter grades. So we received lots of feedback around that. So yep, lots of conversations, but wanting to get these models moving forward so we can get teachers time to work on the curriculum and then working on that. So that is the only parameter that I know right now, because I want our committee to be able to dive into and look at what that looks like. So we attended a conference. There was about 15 of us from the district, a virtual conference a few weeks ago around grading. And then from there, we'll partner with our union representation and teachers and make sure that we set all of our students up for success, but that we have a system that meets the feedback that we received from the spring. So.
Thank you. Are there any other questions regarding where we're at now in the process? Okay, please
I hate to do this, but I'm going to ask one, and Allison can tell me it's coming. You're going to give us more. You're going to give us more details, I know, on secondary. And I was a secondary classroom teacher and in the media center, and I'm thinking of our wonderful programs we've had for college in the schools and all sorts of different, what would you say, choice classes that are very specific, many of them lab, like FACS classes, things in industrial tech, whatever. And obviously those can't be the same right now, but this is now, it's not forever. And we'll have a great big vaccine party and hug everybody, and then we can make another transition. So I look at this as the absolute best we can do now, looking forward to the grand finale where we take what we've learned to do things better, but also get back our full, robust choices. Maybe by winter. I mean, I'm always an optimist. So I'm just thinking, we're doing it this way now, but what happens from now? I have a neighbor who's done college in the schools, hopes to still do it, and says, hey, they're doing it online at the colleges. We still have the choice, don't we? So that's my question.
Yeah, our intention is to still have all those classes. They obviously will look different, and our principals are, their plan is to work with their staff around scheduling and what that looks like specifically, but we will make sure that our students have opportunities. That's an important aspect. I know it's a really hard and difficult balance to make sure we're also safe, which is a huge priority as well. And so how are we safe without sacrificing an education for our students, without compromising the safety? And it is it's difficult. It's a difficult decision and difficult to navigate. I too look forward to when we can be beyond this Dr. Newmaster. I look forward to that party. I hope I'm invited.
Thank you, Dr. Gillespie. Ms. Thompson, did you have a question?
I do. Thank you. I was wondering, I have spoken with some teachers who work in other districts, and one of them had mentioned that in their district, they went to their special ed teachers and asked them how they felt about being in school where with the students 4 days a week, not necessarily following the hybrid model with some of the students who have more needs than others. I know, as an example, Birch Lake Elementary has that fabulous program where they provide therapy and all kinds of wonderful things for their students. Is that something we're considering, where those students may get, if the families want them in school and they're able to come and do it safely, if we're considering, following a little bit different option for our special ed students or our students who maybe have benefit more from that hands-on type of learning and therapy that they receive when they're in school with our wonderful staff that helps them with those needs.
Yeah, this is Lisa Oren. Thanks, Angela, for that question. Yes, we are considering that. We will be making individual IEP team decisions for our students with exceptional needs so that we can create a plan that focuses both on their strengths and their areas of need. So we will be looking at that.
Great, thank you.
Can I do a follow-up to that? Does that mean that potentially those students would be in the building with those teachers, even at the secondary level? Say there's no in-person learning there for everybody else. Would those students potentially be there?
So if the district as a whole is in distance learning, then we would follow that plan. But if the district has in-person learning, then we would look at each student's individual situation and make an IEP team decision.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Chair Mullen?
Mr. Chapman?
Yeah, the questions, there's a lot of questions, a lot of great questions, a lot of great information here. But I'm wondering if we're already past halfway, more than halfway past the allotted time. And it sounds like there's a fair amount of the presentation yet to go. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't proceed and then ask questions after the presentation's over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chapman. I was just going to say, let's continue to move on, and we'll continue to, we'll open it up to questions at the end. Thank you.
All right, we can go to the next slide. So then for distance learning, so as I mentioned before, the students who are at home would have the same learning boards that for elementary that students would have in the students when they're in school, or students who are hybrid and alternating between 3 days in school and 1 day out of school on Monday through Thursday. And every day students would receive live digital mini lessons in literacy, which includes reading and writing, math, a morning meeting / social and emotional learning, and that's daily Monday through Thursday. And those digital, they would be scheduled so families would know when to anticipate them. They would be recorded and posted to Seesaw, so families who couldn't view them at that particular time would be able to access them. And then digital mini lessons in either science or social studies would occur at least twice weekly. And then again, learning boards would serve as a foundation for communication with families around the weekly learning goals, and will include reinforcement and enrichment activities. And so that will be the predictable structure across the board. And what will change then is how often students are actually face-to-face with their teachers and how often they're seeing their teachers through that digital platform using Google. Then we already talked about this, but specialist time will be added as the school year starts, and the building leaders really wanted to partner with our specialist teachers to look at what that would mean. And again, small group check-ins can be scheduled as needed, but and then Fridays especially will be some additional time for our educators to do that. We received tons of feedback for secondary where students and staff missed that synchronous, that scheduled time throughout the week in the spring to check in with their students. And so we will have live digital lessons with their students at least twice weekly. Again, when students aren't attending digital lessons, they'll have individual work in small groups with their peers and or small group check-ins with their teachers. And again, our building principals will work on specifics of those schedules and what they look like with the educators in their building. And I anticipate that those schedules will continue to fluctuate as we receive feedback from our students and families throughout the year. You can go to the next slide. So attendance, they give us quite a few specific guidelines on each model and how attendance should be taken so that we make sure students receive credit for being in school and that our funding is streamlined. And so we'll navigate that. We do our very best to be responsive to our families and as flexible as possible while staying within the guidelines. We haven't had a ton of time yet to dive into the exact specifics. We have stuff where we I think set a good foundation for the spring, and we'll build upon that as we look for this upcoming school year. And then I mentioned grading. Our plan is to work collaboratively. My plan is to work collaboratively with those two groups, have something to bring to you at the work study session on August 24th, and ask you to take action at the September 14th regular school board meeting. You can go to the next slide. As you can imagine, activities is another really hot button topic for many of our students and our families. And of course, for us, we all value how important sports and activities are for our students. And the State High School League really is the organization that would decide what that would look like for the activities that they govern in terms of our high school activities. And Brian Peliquin and Matt St. Martin, our activities directors, they will let us know and keep us posted. But next week, I believe it is Tuesday, the board is looking at multiple different options on what that would look like for the fall sports season, ranging from having the season as is to a modified season to, if they needed to cancel the season, but all different ranges, and they could have something that wouldn't come out of those options. So lots of different options being discussed, and we'll let you know as soon as we do. And then
I'll just add one thing. You're right. Tuesday, that conversation is happening, and then I think they've committed to Wednesday morning releasing the decision on activities. So we'll be waiting for that. Thanks.
Then our community services and recreation has offered lots of programs. It's fun to hear kids this summer. I heard kids laughing and giggling. I'm not quite sure what they were playing yesterday, but it was great to hear. And so they will continue to follow the guidelines given to them as from MDH, MDE, CDC to make sure we're offering programs. We know and value all of that for our students and community, and look forward to being able to provide activities for our students and families and as safe, following those guidelines, and to make sure our kids are safe, but they're super important for our community and kids. And lastly, school age care, which as you can imagine, there's lots of questions there as well. Depending on the model and how we move through that, when and if we are in a hybrid model or distance learning, there's stipulations that we would then provide a no-cost child care to Tier 1 critical workers, and that's defined by the state. And we'll work through those guidelines and make sure to clearly communicate that with our parents' families so they understand what that means. And then if and when we're in-person learning, there would be some fee-based options for before and after school, and that's consistent throughout each one of those models, but providing that no-cost childcare during school hours for our Tier 1 critical workers. So more information will be shared as we're able to get closer to a finalized model and make sure that families have that information, because we know that they're wanting to plan what fall will look like for their families. All right, I think next up is Tim Wald and Bridget, his team.
Yes, thank you, Chair Mullen, members of the board. The nutrition or the operation side of this is certainly no less complicated as the instructional side of it. So it's a moving target, and we continue to learn and make and plan as we go. Really, what we have so far is what we know so far. So it's an evolving process, and we're continuing to tweak and change our plans as we learn more. And we expect that that will continue over the next month. And really, as we get kids back into school, we expect that we'll be continuing to change and learn as that process goes. First Nutritional Services, we expect that we'll be serving breakfast and lunch every day as we have in the past. So there'll be some changes to that. Meals will be prepackaged. Students won't be, there won't be spaces for students to dish themselves up, or no self-service. In terms of how meal times will look, those will be staggered, and we'll have kids in small groups, distance as much as possible. We expect that some of that will be in the classrooms, that some of it will be in cafeterias or in areas spread throughout the building. We expect that students will be coming to the cafeteria to pick up their meals in socially distanced lines. Those meals will be served in a way that they can be transported back to a classroom. In the hybrid learning model and the in-person learning model will look very much the same, although we expect that we will have an opportunity to be providing lunches or breakfast perhaps to students who are not in school on those days. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, nor have we received information on what the funding models of that will look like. And so we'll learn more as we go. And then that applies to distance learning as well. We're anxiously awaiting information on how that will be funded. Bridget Lane and her staff are outstanding. They've been networking with other schools, and they're on the forefront of the best thinking in nutrition services. Bridget's with us today. Bridget, is there anything you'd like to add?
Not at this time, Tim. I think you covered it.
Okay. All right, we'll move on. Transportation is an area that is really mind-boggling in how you transport students to school. And so what we really will need to do is ask families to partner with us and transport their children to school if and however they can do that, if that's as a family or in a small carpool. But we're definitely going to need to reduce the ridership on our buses. Adding buses is, even if there was funding available for that, probably not a possibility given that we have limited vehicles and even more limited access to drivers. So we'll ask families to partner with us. We'll be looking at extending walking distances to school. Of course, we'll be asking our students and staffs to wear face masks on those buses. We'll be spreading them out on the bus to whatever extent possible. We'll be asking families to actively request transportation. So we're going to make the assumption that unless a family signs up for transportation, that they're going to transport their child to school. But we expect that there'll be quite a few families who will need transportation, and we stand ready to provide on that. In some cases, we have families who request multiple 2 to 3 stops for their family based on where a student might start their day. And that's going to create a really difficult hardship for us to deliver on. And so we may be asking families to limit to 1 address per student. Ms. Boyd, you had a question?
Yeah. What's the protocol, especially for buses, if a student refuses to wear a mask, or are we going to be requiring the bus drivers to handle those students? That might be a little difficult.
Yeah, that's a good question. Our expectation is that students will have a mask on when they get on the bus, and that's an expectation that we're going to ask parents to make sure happens. We'll have to put a plan together. If I imagine there's a possibility that could happen, we'll put a plan together for that. We don't have a plan for that yet.
Well, and also I know picking up from all of these schools, just in normal times, there's long lines. Are we going to find some way to stagger pickup times?
We don't anticipate staggering pickup times. Our transportation schedule is pretty tight, and so we have to stay on schedule as much as we possibly can. The goal is to reduce ridership. And I think there'll be families who will prefer to drive their kids to school, maybe who have bused in the past. And there are families who just can't make that happen. And so by asking parents to actively sign up for transportation, requesting their help getting their children to school, we're hoping that we can reduce that ridership to a safe level and efficient level, and we can continue to run our routes on time and start school on time.
How do we handle the traffic though, especially around the district center at Central?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if we ask more parents to drive their kids to school, then that begs the question of, boy, we have a lot of challenges already with morning drop off and afternoon pickup. And we haven't put that plan together yet, but we're anticipating multiple locations at a school site where families can drop off and where we would be ready to welcome kids and we'd have them secured. There may be we'll continue to examine that. We have some ideas for solutions that we're probably not quite ready to speak to yet, but we'll continue to work on that.
Also, for the secondary, for high school, a lot of those kids can drive, but we don't have quite the parking spots. Do we anticipate being able to increase parking in those lots so that we don't have to use busing at the high schools as much?
I don't anticipate that we're going to have more parking space. If we are in a hybrid situation at high school, that will certainly help with parking and allow more students to drive. And the high school team right now is working on how they would manage that kind of parking accessibility for hybrid versus all students.
Because wouldn't we have to completely change that? Because right now it's basically a first come, first serve for purchasing the parking spot.
Yeah, if it's in a hybrid situation, of course, that cuts in half the number of students who would need a parking spot each day. So I think we'd be in a pretty solid place to make that work.
I mean, if we're in a hybrid model, that works. But if we're going back and forth between different models based on what's happening with the COVID numbers, we could potentially be in person at some point, and then we've doubled the need for those spaces because you're going to have two people in space.
Yeah, thank you. There's going to need to be a plan for hybrid parking accessibility and all students in school. And those will be two different plans, and we'll need to communicate that out to families when we have it fully developed.
Okay, thank you.
So that's it for transportation. A lot of things, a lot of good conversation between Mike Torito, our transportation coordinator, and his team. Again, like nutrition services, Mike's been well networked within our community. And well, to use Dr. Kazmierczyk's words, we have a team of all-stars in our operations department, and Mike's no exception to that. Mr. Torito, do you have anything to add about transportation?
No, I can go back to the mask question. We plan on having masks on board. So if students do show up without a mask, we can give them one, and hopefully they'll just put that on and we can deal with it at the school and so forth. So we will have masks on the bus to hand to students in case they show up without one. That's it.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So earlier in the presentation, there were some questions around safety precautions throughout the day in our schools, and that is again a bit of a moving target, but one that we've been working hard on. And so Dan Rozier and Kevin Klecker. Dan Rozier is our director of our facilities, and Kevin Klecker has been working on the safety side of it. And so we have some good plans in place, and we will have staff disinfecting high-touch areas in classrooms, hallways, restrooms throughout the day. We'll have disinfecting wipes and sprays available. We'll continue to work on the details of that plan. Building ventilation is something that Dan Rozier and his team have been working on, and expect that they'll be able to meet and probably exceed what MDH guidance will be. on our ventilation systems. We expect that we'll be doing deep cleaning. On the slide here, enhanced disinfecting each night. We'll have hand sanitizers throughout the building. Opportunities for hand washing within the classrooms when available, and then, of course, within our restrooms. We won't have drinking fountains. They'll be disabled, but our water fillers will be working, and so there'll be access to water that way. Dan and his team have been installing more bottle fillers throughout the district this summer, and so we have greater access than we've had in the past. Then, of course, in our front offices, we have plexi shields to protect our employees and our visitors to the office from each other as they interact in office environments. Again, the social distancing part of it, we social distance so that we can be safe together in indoor spaces. And so within our buildings, we will have signs marked, reminders throughout the building to be 6 feet apart. You see a sample over there on that slide. And reminders and stickers on the floor or tape on the floor to indicate where that 6 foot distancing will occur. That first bullet on modifying schedules, we know that some classrooms are going to be a more of a challenge. One of the most difficult places is within a band or choir room. And so we'll continue to work on finding alternative spaces where they can work in safe ways. An example might be in a theater setting where a choir can spread out throughout the theater and have significant distance between each person. Of course, face coverings as consistent with the governor's order, limiting visitors on campus. And so we, we'll be screening everyone as they enter the building, and visitors will be asked to stay away from our buildings unless there's a reason that they need to be there. So we'll be limiting that. We talked about meals, spacing desks to the degree that we're able to. Bridget and her team and the Nutrition Services Department are working on boxes and strategies for getting meals enclosed and safely moved from room to room. We'll be reducing any large gatherings, so they're we'll follow the protocols for social distancing. And then each building has already identified a sick room. So if a student comes in and we think that there's some concerns about their health as they enter the building, we'll have an immediate sick room to isolate that student before they go home. So our nurses have been working on that plan. All right, thanks. Again, as it relates to students, so masks will be required for all students in our programs. We'll be optimizing that 6 foot distancing to the very degree that's feasible. I mentioned hand sanitizer already, cleaning solutions in classrooms, health screening when students enter, building ventilation at optimum capacity. Dan, do you want to just speak to that a little bit when we talk about optimum capacity, what that means at the building level?
Yeah, sure. I've gotten a lot of questions about our building ventilation systems and what we're going to do. We've got automation systems in all our buildings, very new systems. We're able to change hours, change schedules. So what we've been doing is starting when we would normally start our HVAC systems when school starts early in the morning. We're able to change schedules, and we've been starting them up at 4 a.m., giving them 2 or 3 hours before anybody gets in the building to turn the air over. And we're running extended times at night also. So when people leave the building, we're still turning air over in our buildings. We're bringing in fresh outside air pretty much all day long when that building's occupied. It's pulling in new air, filtering it, and pushing out old air. So all of our buildings have these systems. Some are newer, some are older, but we have the same capabilities even with our older systems to pull in the fresh air, filter it, and kick out outside air. So what we're looking at now is some of the guidance from the Department of Health and how should we open up the dampers more to bring in more fresh air? It's looking like that's probably what we're going to end up doing, just to increase the pressure in the building. So that's the biggest question I'm getting is our HVAC system. So be assured that even our older systems, we're able to do what we need to do to keep fresh air in our buildings.
All right. Thank you, Dan. And then finally, restrict sharing of school supplies. So we'll be cognizant of that for our student safety. Staff safety looks very much the same. One difference would be face shields will be available. We've already secured quite a large number of plastic face shields, and governors announced yesterday that they'll be providing some too. So there shouldn't be any shortage of masks or face shields available to our staff. Again, our staff will be screened just as our students as we enter the building every day. Miss Beloit has a question.
Yeah, does the health screening, does that mean that we're going to be taking everybody's temperature when they come in?
You know, we haven't locked that down yet because we were looking for guidance to see if the guidance changes or what that's going to ultimately be. We'll be prepared to do that if that's the right way to go about it. We'll have the equipment to do it.
Okay, thank you.
And Miss Allison?
I have a question about, and maybe this isn't the right time for this and it's still being worked out. I have a question about sick time for staff. So if staff come down with COVID or have to quarantine, how is that going to work with their paid time off?
I'm happy to take that one.
Thanks, Matt.
You bet. So the way that that's going to work, Jessica, is that staff will, of course, have access to the time off that they already have. In addition to that, for a number of reasons, at least through December 31st, staff are going to have access to some additional time through the Federal CARES Act. And then, in addition to that, you know, we're taking it really seriously that we don't want staff to come to work if they're ill. And so we don't want to create an incentive to do just that if it's not appropriate to do so. And so we are going to make an exception in exactly those two instances where we have a staff member with a confirmed case or who is in the process of being diagnosed as they've been advised to do so by a third-party expert, or they've been advised to quarantine by a third-party expert. Mostly that's going to be the Minnesota Department of Health for up to 14 days. We're actually just going to ensure that they're paid through that time period without needing to access individual personal sick leave. So that's the stance we're taking. That goes above and beyond what state or federal guidelines would mandate, but we think that that's going to be the proper approach to make sure that we're not creating an incentive, kind of a perverse incentive for staff to need to be in the building if they're in that kind of a position.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Are there any other questions so far?
Chair Mullen, I've got a question.
Mr. Chapman.
In terms of staff, is I think we've all been communicated with regard to staff anxieties, concerns, frustrations, and particularly the fear of, you know, those that may be have underlying health conditions or have an age concern, anything like that. What options, if any, are there for staff that just do not feel that they can safely put themselves, you know, into a school environment, a face-to-face environment? You know, it sounded like the governor yesterday was making some type of overture that maybe there would be something to deal with those issues in terms of like remote teaching options or something like that, unless I heard wrong, and maybe I did. So I'm just curious what if any options there would be for staff that just feel due to their health or family members concerned about bringing something potentially home to them that are at elevated risk, what options that they've got.
Sure. So this does get extremely complicated because people's situations are just so very different. And so we've done some reaching out already. And of course, there's going to be a lot more of that as this really comes into focus. The interaction between employees in the human resources department and their supervisors as well for just working through this. But you know, there are going to be some options, but I don't know that we're going to have you know, an opening to engage in that kind of virtual work for every employee that would want to do so. But we're going to work through a very similar process to what we usually work through in the case that somebody is either cannot come to work themselves or needs to care for somebody, to provide care for somebody. So that's something that we're very used to dealing with, whether that's through whether that's working through collectively bargained agreements or whether that's working through the Family Medical Leave Act. You know, we have experience with that. And when it comes to that notion of flexibility there, I think that we're going to try to be as flexible as we can where we think that it's going to be truly viable to provide a distance opportunity for work. I don't think that we want to force people into a situation that's inappropriate simply to do so, or in solidarity or some notion like that. We want to make sure that you know, there's an authentic reason for our employees needing to be physically present in the workplace, and that's been our guiding philosophy through the spring, summer, and will continue to be the philosophy in the fall. When we heard some of those remarks yesterday, there was some clarification that came out just in terms of the governor's actual executive order, which used some language that was very similar to what was used previously in the to guide us through the spring and summer, which was essentially kind of an as appropriate note, or as possible. So as we have those kinds of positions that naturally lend themselves to being able to provide a distance learning opportunity or a virtual work setting, we'll certainly explore that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, concerns, comments? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Walt, I would ask you to please continue.
All right, I think that's it for Tim. If you'd advance. Okay, so we're at the end of our presentation. So our course of action going forward. So we intend to follow the learning model parameters that we talked about earlier in the meeting to determine what learning model we'll be in. Again, I mentioned earlier, if the decision were made today, we could certainly go with an in-person model for elementary, and then we'd be in the hybrid for secondary. However, I think we need to pause and let more data come in, and so we'll continue to monitor that. And so, in fact, you know, if you were asking, I'm maybe tipping my hand, perhaps, or our hand. If you're asking today, the recommendation would likely be actually to go with a hybrid K-12 would be the model that we would recommend based on where we are with the data and where it's trending. And but we're not going to make that final determination right now. We're going to continue to monitor the data. We've got work to do between now and when that decision is ultimately made. And I would like to hold off until August 20th, so we have the latest data possible and balancing giving families enough notice, but knowing that I suspect we'll be in a hybrid model at that point as well. But just giving it some time here between now and when it's appropriate to make a decision. And we would not be an outlier. I was on a meeting this morning with many area superintendents, and I know some have announced plans already. Many are choosing to wait until there's some later data available. And I would be on that side, and that would be my plan right now is to wait until that point. But the anticipation is that we would likely be in a K-12 hybrid situation at that point. So I'm happy to take, yeah, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kazmierczak. I think that I know that there's probably some questions that that are probably wanting to be asked. So let's start there with Ms. Beloit. Did you have a question?
Yeah, if I agreed on waiting to make the decision because a lot of data could change in a couple of weeks. So, but I'm wondering what that does for the planning for the teachers. I'm still a little confused as to when the teachers will be planning and how they're going to plan, because that doesn't leave a lot of time, because I'm assuming we're still starting at what, September 8th? That's still a hard and fast date for when we're beginning, correct?
We're going to start, yeah. Yep.
So what happens with the teacher planning? How does that look, and how much time are they going to have to, because right now they're still going to be looking at potentially all three models.
That's where the learning model, the actual, when I reference how they set up their lessons, will be the same regardless of how those models are given. So they will be given time if they choose to use it in August. And, you know, if they can use it through September, I will make sure that they have the time that they need. And so I've been working really closely with Tiffany Dietrich, the union president, and you know, we have those 3 groups working, and they're getting close to having that work done. And then my intention as soon as possible is to give principals hours to tell their teacher teams that they can start working virtually on setting up lessons. So.
Okay, and then I just have a couple follow-ups on safety. We didn't touch on if we have a case, say a student or a teacher, do we already have a protocol set up for how we're going to handle a COVID case? I know we've had some, so what have we done previously, and what will we be doing in this coming year?
Would you like me to take that one?
Please.
Sure. So what we've done previously, as that's happened, and we have had that happen in our systems, we actually have really not had transmission between stakeholders within our system, but we have had individuals who have interacted with us or employees who have been in the workplace and have contracted COVID-19. And when that's happened, we've immediately worked with the Minnesota Department of Health to do contact tracing on that. And we relied on their guidance and expertise to identify those individuals who have been a close contact so that we can make sure that everyone's quarantining appropriately. So that's what that looks like when that happens. Again, those are those circumstances where we do ensure that employees are able to have that time, and or students are able to have that time, but employees without needing to access sick time, for instance. And so that's how we've dealt with that. We've worked with our own internal experts and also third-party experts, namely the Minnesota Department of Health, to make sure that we're doing that appropriately.
So if we have a case, do we have rapid testing available for use for, you know, the teacher in the front of the class, and we discovered that they have it? So would we have testing for all of the students in that class, or how much of that is going to be available?
So the idea would be, and this has changed over time. So the commitment that we have is that we are absolutely going to follow to the T and at least meet, if not exceed, the recommendations promulgated by MDH at the time. And so when that's happened, we have had people get tested. What I would say, this is just based on anecdotal evidence, is that in the spring and the beginning of the summer, we were getting results back in terms of testing within 24 to 48 hours, depending on the employee's provider. It sounds like some of that is slowed down. That being said, the governor did speak to that yesterday, and so did the other state officials that were present yesterday at the press conference to speak to ensuring that there's going to be rapid testing available to schools. And so when it comes to identify who needs to be tested, that's where we're going to continue to work with MDH through their protocols to ensure that that happens. But that's always going to be a measure of kind of both our own private and then also public resources in order to get that testing accomplished, because it does happen within the the medical professional sphere there.
Yeah, and I know we can't plan for every situation that's going to come up because there's 100,000 of them that we haven't even thought of to this point. But I'm assuming that we're going to treat each case separately. So if one group is exposed, that doesn't mean we have to shut down an entire school, correct?
That would generally not be the case unless for some reason MDH felt like the Minnesota Department of Health felt that there was a reason to do so. However, no, that's typically not been the case. In fact, with the way that we were able to operate through the spring and summer, if that happened, and really this was mostly the spring, in the case that happened, it was really an individual room.
Do we believe that we can get that information? Do we believe that we can get that guidance and information from them in real time? We won't
yes,
have,
it happens very quickly. It happens very quickly. They are working on Sunday nights, which we certainly experienced. In the spring, they are working 24 hours a day, essentially, to make sure that happens. So that moves very quickly. From the moment that we know that we've got a positive case to working with MDH, it's a matter of minutes or hours. Response time has been very good in that regard. And so I'm hopeful that as we're getting really large systems off the ground and running here, that they're going to be able to continue to provide that kind of excellent service. I assume that they are, and it really was greatly appreciated and worked very well in the spring.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Yep. Thank you, Ms. Beloyd. Mr. Chapman, you had a question?
Yeah, couple of comments. First off, I'm in very much agreement to hold off as long as we reasonably can so that we see what's going on, but not jeopardize being able to implement, whatever plan or model it is that we feel needs to happen. The second is I'm not sure if the Teachers Association president was invited, Tiffany, to today's meeting, but in future work studies, given the scope and the breadth and the depth of this whole thing, I would be in favor of having a representative, Tiffany, participate in the discussions here in case we have any questions relative to what the membership and what her teaching staff is feeling with regard to this, because obviously they're, as all staff, but the teaching staff in particular are a critical element of this whole discussion in my mind. So anyway, just throwing that out there.
All right, thanks, Kim. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Ms. Ellison, Wayne, did you have a follow-up for that?
No, I was just thanking Kim for the comment. Yep.
All right. Ms. Ellison, you had a question?
I do. I have two questions. First, I want to acknowledge the amount of time and effort that has gone into making these decisions and setting up these plans. We are in an impossible situation. And so I just want to thank leadership and staff and teachers for all their work. I have two questions. One, will this affect school start and end times, or will they be the same elementary, middle, and high start and end times as in previous years?
Right now, the start time is looking to be the same, although there might be an adjustment at the slight adjustment at the secondary level to help accommodate busing. Might do some busing a little bit differently. And then in the afternoon, the end time would be earlier than what we're used to by about an hour. We'd be shifting the entire system an hour early to accommodate that prep at the end of the day and then getting students on the road.
Okay. And then my other question is, so at the very beginning of this presentation, when Dr. Gillespie was setting out the hybrid learning plan, looking at in-person elementary, that was students in school for 3 days, at home for 1, and then Fridays off, and then doing work at home, and then something similar in secondary. Is this the plan then that we are ready to hit send on August 20th, or would it substantially change if the data changes? Because from what I'm hearing is that we're waiting until August 20th to see what the data looks like at that time. But if the trajectory is going up, and we know that it's going up, and that we already have this, what I think is a really great plan in place, why are we going to wait until August 20th to make an official announcement? And I'm hearing what you're saying. I mean, I know Minneapolis and St. Paul have already made their decisions, and other districts are waiting. But if we have this really great plan, what is the reasoning behind waiting until 3 weeks before school starts?
We do have a great plan, and we'll continue to refine it. But we don't know what the data will show us in the next 3 weeks. There's a chance that we could, that the data would indicate we need to go to K-12 distance learning if the data were to indicate that. And so by making an announcement now about this is what we're going to do, I just think it's too early.
So the plan then that we have, can it be easily transitioned then into distance learning? Because I heard what Dr. Gillespie was saying about the digital course, the digital classes and the digital lessons. So as our teachers are thinking about where they're going to be on September 8th, can they take this as sort of a baseline to begin thinking about what they will be doing if it happens that we have to go entirely distance learning? I'm just trying to consider that this is a monumental shift in the way that they're doing their work. And I know that you all know that, and Dr. Gillespie and your team are doing great work, but I just want to acknowledge the amount of work for our teachers.
For sure. And they will have students on distance learning no matter what model we're on. So we will, that's that framework work that's going on. My intention for having those teams working is that it's a support in terms of how can I start thinking? And it's not, our teachers are not starting from zero, but it is, how do I look at this, model of really, it is when our kids in front of you, it's not how the lesson design changes. And so that those framework will help them, and they will be able to start working on that as soon as that framework is finalized. And I mean, we're working all day, every day. So it is like real time. I was just texting Tiffany around I want to get this hours. What's this? So we're literally working every moment, because I know time is of the essence. And you're right. It's a lot of work, and our teachers deserve to have that time. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I appreciate all of this work. I know that this is just impossible. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elson. Ms. Thompson, did you have a question?
I did, and also would like to reiterate, the appreciation for all the work that has gone into this by everybody. It's hard work, and none of the answers are going to be completely satisfactory to everybody, as we all know. But I feel like you guys really have put in a lot of effort to this, and we're doing the best we can. With that, I noticed a couple questions have already kind of been answered a little bit, but I was wondering about the cleaning aspect again a little more. Is that something I kind of saw? Maybe it looked like that teachers will be expected to take part in this process throughout the day, and if so, how? I mean, is it just like a quick wipe down of surface, or is it something that is going to take them more time? Some of these cleaning chemicals need to air dry on the surface before they can be handled again. What does it look like for them in this extra requirement? And then I'm pretty sure that I heard that we will not be expecting teachers to use up all of their PTO time for when they need to quarantine due to being exposed, or many of the different things that could come up, whether it be them or even somebody in their home that they have to care for, whatever it may be. If we could just maybe one more time make sure that I understood that there is time that they will be able to use that does not include their PTO time, and that they will be covered. If I worded that right.
If it's okay, I'll start with the cleaning question, and then Mr. Mons can talk
You
about
bet.
the PTO. And so Dan Rozier and Kevin Kleck are on the call too, and I'll ask them to, in a moment, to comment on maybe the chemicals that will be available in the classrooms that we're working on securing. Certainly with the cleaning, it's going to be an all hands on deck expectation that all of us are going to have some responsibility for keeping our work areas clean and chipping in on keeping public areas clean or classroom areas clean as much as possible. We really don't have finalized protocols on that though, in terms of what would be expected of each staff member. So we'll be working on that over the next few weeks and coming up with a plan that we think will be most effective. And Dan or Kevin, if one of you could talk about what chemicals we'll be using.
Yeah, I can jump in, Tim. I know Mr. Mullen mentioned earlier about PPE and supplies that they have been in tight demand, but we've been working since March to kind of stockpile our disinfectants, our wipes, our rubber gloves, things like that. So what we're looking to do is supply every classroom. We've got these Clorox hydrogen peroxide wipes, which are very safe, very quick kill, 30 seconds to 1 minute on a surface, that we're hoping teaching staff or paras can help in classrooms, just to give desks a quick wipe down maybe after lunch or something like that. Unfortunately, we only have one custodian in most of our elementary buildings over the daytime, so it's impossible for them to be able to get in classrooms. We're going to have them do the public areas, the drinking fountains, stairway railings, crash bars on doors, things like that. But we do have a pretty good stockpile of wipes. If we run out of wipes, we've been ordering spray bottles. We've got a great stockpile of spray disinfectants that we can transition over to if wipes are in tight supply again. So we're going to have to work on a cleaning plan in classrooms, and but I'm confident if we get some help, we can pull it off pretty well.
Want me to take it away on the time off front?
Yes, please.
Okay. So to just reiterate what I had stated before, there's going to be two scenarios in which an employee would not be asked to use time off, whether that's from their personal allocation or whether that would be additional federal days that they would have, federally granted days that they would have access to, which is 10. However, some employees may have already used some portion of those. So the two situations in which an employee would use miscellaneous time off code as opposed to in allocation would be if they have personally been diagnosed, or else they have been told to seek that diagnosis, or they themselves are quarantining. If somebody does need to care for a dependent or a spouse, we'd look at that. They would generally be using accumulated time off for that purpose.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mons. Ms. Thompson, does that answer all your questions?
Yes, it does. Thanks. Sorry, having trouble with the mute again, but thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Newmaster, I know you had a question?
Yes, I did. And can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Good. There's so many things on the screen, I can't even see if my mic turned off or on. I had one that I think is a quick one from Mike Torito about busing. We've got a complex program going on, and I know at least one of the private high schools that many of our locals attend is going full-time open. And we provided busing as an option. How are we handling that with our complex busing schedule? Are we mandated to provide busing to private schools? And that might be a yes or no. I don't know.
Currently, we do not provide transportation to the non-public high schools or any schools outside of our district boundaries. We're only required to supply transportation within our boundaries of our school. So like your Fossati and Magnuson those types of schools. So yeah, so to answer your question, we are not transporting to that high school.
Well, but we do have at least one high school within our school boundaries, I believe, the Ag School or whatever. Isn't that one in Hugo?
Yeah, they do their own transportation. So
Okay, I just wondered because I thought you've got so many moving parts with this. It gets really almost mind-boggling. Thank you for that.
Sure.
And then I'm looking at testing. We've had a lot of questions and answers, but we had a live run of trying this all with the free daycare and with the summer programs. And I'm just curious, what kind of data did we get? Did we have any active cases? Did we have to shut down, do tracing? You know, that's my only other question, because that would give us some idea of what we might face.
I can answer your one question in regards to the summer months, Marge. We did experience some cases. We've had a small handful, given our summer extended day program, our camps and clinics and other activities going on. We've had maybe three or four over the course of the summer that were handled really quickly. You know, the way we were strategically able to set up our programs into our pod method, it affected as least amount of individuals as possible, as we're able to keep people in groups. As Matt mentioned earlier in his explanation too, yep, we do have certain letters guided by MDH around low risk and high risk, and those are communicated appropriately through the guidance provided by them.
Is that
okay? I'm going to say thank you. I mean, that's encouraging, and a lot of that stuff was outside, so that's a little bit different than what we're now facing as things get cooler, but it does sound good. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Newmaster. Mr. Chapman, did you have a follow-up question?
Actually, Mr. Chair, I've got just a couple of questions or comments relative to two very different things with regard to all of this. First off, with regard to transportation, if I heard correctly, we're basically going to take an opt-in type of approach. And if that is indeed the case, what is the kind of the plan of action, and maybe that hasn't been totally worked out yet, as to heavily communicating to the community, to the district families, that will need to be done on their part, that it's not going to be a passive type situation this year for busing, but rather an opt-in situation, like I say, if I'm understanding this correctly. And it's going to be imperative to get that word out many, many times, especially if we're going to bump up within, not a decision made until upwards of 3 weeks before the start of school. There would almost, I think, have to be every other day at least, probably some type of communication so that people are not, caught off guard in this whole thing. The second item I've got, and it just came to mind while we were talking today, Ms. Ellison and I sit on the policy committee, and I'm just wondering if we need to be doing anything relative to any new policies or updating policies relative to PPE, disciplinary policies, so on and so forth, that may apply to all of this situation. If kids, for example, aren't wearing the masks like they should, or staff for that matter, things that are not being done that are required, what the governing documents, the policies, what changes may need to be made there. So that's more of a comment, I guess, at this point relative to those policies. But I think if that's not been done, we definitely need to take a look at all of that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Is there, Dr. Kazmierczak, do you have a response for that?
No, the policy question was a comment, and I agree. We can start thinking. We have been thinking about that, and we can formalize that. And then I don't know if Tim and Mike, if you've thought about the process, but for transportation for eligible.
Yeah, well, point well taken. Mr. Chapman, that is going to be a important communication piece. So we'll be work with our communications department, Marissa Vetti and Ari, to make sure that gets out really clearly. But clearly, that's going to have to be well communicated.
Yeah, emails, phone calls. I know that families will have to be called directly. Yeah.
And I'll just add to this, in addition to the communication that the transportation department will be doing, as the communications department, we would absolutely be including that information that we're sending out to families, and that includes, the beginning of the year letter. We can put something on the calendar, pages of important info, and the multitude of ways that we are communicating with people now, that we always do, but then it ramps up at the beginning of the year.
Thank you, Ms. Fetty. Mr. Chapman, is that complete your comments?
It does. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Beloy, did you have an additional question?
One second. Can you hear me now? Okay, now I can't hear anybody, but you can hear me. I'll keep going.
I can hear
Okay,
you.
I can hear people. I have just a couple questions. So the numbers are going to change. We know the numbers are going to change over weeks and months. How are we going to communicate that to families, and how often will we do that? Well, families and teachers, so that both can prepare for what's coming. And that kind of leads into my next question is, what kind of communication are we going to send out today after this meeting to the families and staff? I guess this would be for Wayne.
Yeah, Marissa, if you want to chime in as well. How we would communicate as data changes throughout the year. I mean, I don't know if we'd be communicating every 2 weeks or every week as we get updated data or not. We would obviously need to communicate if we're anticipating a change in the model, and there are steps outlined in the guidance that we got. So we'd follow that. I don't know that it would be a weekly communication necessarily, but if there was an indication that we were headed towards a different model, we would do that in our regular channels. What's going to be communicated today, Marissa? You and I have communicated about that. So I don't know if you have been thinking about that throughout the meeting, and I know that we do intend to, and do you have an idea?
Sure. Well, and we did send a message to families yesterday, letting them know that this meeting was happening, with the commitment that we would send a message next week, and letting them know what was happening. And I think now that we have even more of an idea, something to our families that we've been doing more recently, the emails letting people know this afternoon. I think we'll send something out, let them know this video will be available for viewing again. The meeting video and information would be then available later this afternoon as well.
Yeah, in just my opinion, I know we've got several schools around us that have already made decisions. So I know parents and everybody that's wondering what's happening are kind of waiting with bated breath to see what the decision is, and letting them know that we haven't made a decision, but this is when the decision will be made, kind of thing, will kind of quell some of that. Also, so from the governor, he said 250 million was going to be allotted, and I read another number that's now up to 400 million. I may have that off. Do we expect to be getting some of that? And if we do, what are going to be the priorities for that, for the use of that? Is it going to be PPE? Is it going to be transportation? What's going to be our biggest focus for that money?
Yeah, I don't know the amount of that would be direct payments to school districts. It's maybe more of a number that is being talked about statewide to pay for, there's been a commitment to PPE, for example, and testing and things like that. And so I don't know if Tim has seen any guidance yet as to specific school district runs on that state commitment. I have not. So we are not counting on additional funding until we get explicit information from from the governor's office, and I have not seen that. So
Do we have we already figured out what we, and have we already figured out what we think the extra costs are going to be from implementing PPE and all the different measures we have to take?
We're currently tracking all of our expenditures and coding in anything that's connected toward COVID response. And so if funds are available, we know that we'll have expenditures that we can apply to them. The governor mentioned some things yesterday that would be state expenses such as masks and testing. And we don't know if that's going to come out of the 400 million he referenced, or if that all of that will go directly to schools. And so we're keeping an eye on our expenditures, but we're also recognizing that we can't wait until money flows to make commitments. And the things you mentioned, Ms. Beloit, are all going to be things that we can't ignore. Busing costs may increase. We know that. We know that we're not going to be able to move this plan forward without some staffing adjustments to what we believe we would have. PPE is something, is an expense that we're already investing in. So all of those things will be, it's hard to prioritize one over the other. They're all critical.
Right. And then my last question, I guess, would be directed towards Mr. Mons. I was wondering, well, actually, it could be a couple of you. What are the special considerations that we're giving to specialists within the building who have to work with every single student? You've got teachers that, go from class to class for different things. You've got your orchestra or band or language or gym or all those things. Are there special considerations for those educators?
They won't do that. They won't do that in terms of and I'm assuming you're talking about elementary school.
Yes.
That's why partnering, even middle school, our new middle school scheduling option, the principals are partnering with the elective teachers, going to have conversations around the schedule. And so in terms of teachers who go into, 3 times as many classrooms as the average teacher and all of that or more, they're going, I'm just estimating right now, they're working with those specialists on that, but that structure can't remain the same for many different reasons.
So then how do we handle physical education, the gym classes? Because they would be working with every single student in the building.
And yep, all of them look different. So it's the same exact thing. So for example, it might be they're a specialist at elementary, so they'll work with it. So it could be that they do some structured recess and they're outside and they restructure. So it's actually movement and they work with them outside, and you can work with bigger groups of kids and there's different parameters. So they're always following the MDH guidelines, but it's not the schedule in everywhere has changed significantly to make sure we're still offering a high quality education, but that we're following the guidelines from MDH. So there's it's all these different variables in there, but it's not not at all the way you're thinking of it, the way we do it normally right now. So I know the elementary principals were working on thinking of, okay, how do we think of movement creatively and what might that look like as we partner with our gym teachers? Middle school is meeting with some of their elective teachers because there's considerations for gym and for music and different guidelines around there. And how do we make sure we're accounting for the MDH guidelines, still providing a high quality education and not sacrificing, creating a model that then has long lasting impacts on their electives for many, many years. And so some districts are going 100% online for those electives. And that may be something that those, specialists choose to do with their elementary principals, but they're going to partner with those teachers to do that. So it isn't business as usual in those classes.
Okay.
And secondary principals are working on a modified schedule with their staff. And, everyone's anticipating wanting to talk with their staff and work with their staff. And our principals are really good at navigating when it's really hard and problem solving. And that's why, I know a day right now feels like 5 weeks for people. So wanting to schedule staff meetings and really I mean, honestly, every time I look down, there's a principal texting, we're putting this together. When can we do this? You know, wanting to align with our organization, but they're best when they can problem solve with their staff and figure out. And this is a hard one for sure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Beloyd. Are there any other questions for anyone? Okay. What I just want to add that, you know, I know that I keep hearing that there's a lot of communication that needs to go out, and I appreciate the fact of all the information that's getting out there to the community and the staff and everyone else. And I appreciate everybody's work on behalf of the plan. I know that there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things still to kind of need to be moved through, and I appreciate that. With that, Dr. Kazmierczak, do you have anything else?
I do not.
With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chair Mullen, I motion that we adjourn the meeting.
I will second that, and would ask the clerk to please call a roll.
Arcand,
Aye.
Beloyd,
Aye.
Chapman,
Aye.
Ellison, aye. Mullen,
Aye.
Newmaster,
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.